Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, poll after...
We are in a quorum call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, in poll after poll, most respondents blame President Biden's policies for increasing inflation and especially higher gas prices. NBC, quote, Biden's job approval falls to the lowest level of his presidency amid war and inflation fears. In Gallup's poll, which they dubbed, quote, Americans offer gloomy state of nation report in February, before the record gas prices at the pumps were even here that we're seeing today, the biggest decline in satisfaction sat squarely with energy policies. In fact, only 27% of Americans said they were satisfied with his energy policies. But if you ask the Biden administration and congressional Democrats, who seem more interested in finger pointing than finding solutions, the culprit changes on a nearly daily basis. First, it was OPEC Plus, not producing enough oil. Then it was the evil corporations price gouging at the expense of hardworking American families. Then it was Vladimir Putin's fault, his invasion of Ukraine, and now it's oil and gas companies sitting on 9,000 leases. Of course, we've come back around today to those greedy oil companies again. But 9,000 leases, that's where I want to spend a little time today to explain the problem with the claim of the 9,000 leases. Let's drill deeper, if you excuse the expression, into that number to truly understand what's going on here and why this type of rebuttal argument is a total disservice to the American people and our allies abroad. The first and most fundamental mistake that White House spokesperson Ms. Psaki has made is using the words lease and permit interchangeably. Lease and permit, not the same thing. They are not synonymous, other than both are regulatory hurdles required by the federal government for a producer to work on federal land. Second, it is important to understand the vast majority, in fact, 2/3 of oil and gas leases on federal lands are producing. There are 35,871 total oil and gas leases in effect, with about 66% of them producing oil or gas. The rest are going through this abused regulatory process or being held up in litigation by environmental NGOs. In fact, over 2,200 of the leases are currently in litigation. And if there's one thing that liberals love more than regulation, it's litigation. Third, a lease does not mean the rented land contains oil and gas. Not all 9,000 of these leases, not being used, even contain oil and gas. Producers first have to perform exploratory work to discover whether their lease even contains the minerals that they're after. Oil and gas producers procure multiple leases because they need to mitigate the financial damage which could result from acquiring only dry leases. It's called a robust portfolio, a comprehensive portfolio. Fourth, before any development on leases can occur, producers and agencies must navigate this bureaucratic maze, this labyrinth of permitting and environmental laws covered by the Endangered Species Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, just to name a few, which can take years to complete. And rarely do these things all get done at the same time. They're never done simultaneously, but rather consecutively. They each take the number of days they need apart from one another rather than all together. Fifth, just because a producer obtains a lease and navigates the regulatory hurdles required to permit a well does not mean they can begin extraction. They must first secure adjoining leases for horizontal drilling. You don't just drill a hole straight down anymore and suck the oil straight up from one silo. You have to get leases from the neighborhood. Then they must secure these leases and then accrue the capital to finance mineral development. It's not done free, it's not even done cheaply. They have to schedule the rigs, construct access roads, obtain pipeline rights of way, establish infrastructure to capture the natural gas, and hire capable workers. All of these steps have been delayed by the administration's roadblocks and Biden's supply chain and labor crisis. And finally, after obtaining an adequate number of leases, clearing all the regulatory hurdles and planning logistics of the project, companies must then obtain an approved application for a permit to drill, otherwise known as an APD. There are currently 4,604 federal APDs awaiting approval from the Bureau of Land Management. BLM and another 160 APDs on federal land. Okay, the Biden administration's BLM could approve these permits now, enabling companies to move forward with development to supply much-needed domestic energy at home and abroad. However, BLM is approving them at the slowest rate since the Obama administration, a fact that Ms. Psaki conveniently leaves out when she claims President Biden was doing everything possible to lower gas prices. In fact, to this specific point, the Bureau of Land Management has state offices in places like Dickinson, North Dakota. They have regional offices in places like Billings, Montana. And that's where the decisions are made, whether the application for a permit to drill becomes a permit to drill until this administration. And they changed that and gave the final authority not to Dickinson, North Dakota, not to Billings, Montana, if you're talking about the Bakken, but rather to Washington, D.C., at the very height of power. In fact, it goes all the way to the Deputy Secretary of the Interior. Now, let's look at some of the data on APDs, applications for permits to drill, and the timelines. In March of 2020, the BLM testified in front of the House Natural Resources Committee about the Trump administration's efforts to improve oil and gas permitting processes. In fiscal year 2019, the BLM approved 3,741 APDs on federal and Indian lands. The average APD processing time for a single application dropped from 139 days in fiscal year 2016 to just 44 days in fiscal year 2019. In fiscal year 2021, which included 4 months of the Trump administration, APD approval times shot back up to 89 days, doubling the amount of time. This is yet another example of the Trump administration's energy success being eliminated by the Biden administration's incompetence. The Biden administration approved just 97 permits for oil and natural gas wells across federal lands in January of this year, a significant plunge from the 643 issued April of last year. All the leases in the world don't matter if you can't get a permit to drill on them, even if, in fact, there is oil and you don't even know that for sure. On top of the regulatory hurdles, industry considerations, supply chain issues, and labor shortages, producers must have certainty that their product can reach a global market. A key aspect of reaching the global market, of course, and reducing the European Union's reliance on dirty Russian gas are United States liquid natural gas export terminals, or LNG terminals. As of March 16, 2022, the United States Department of Energy had 16 applications pending or under review for increasing U.S. LNG exports. If Secretary Granholm signed off or streamlined the review on these applications, we could increase our export capacity to help our allies abroad and grow our economy right here at home. The Biden administration has extended its onshore and offshore oil and gas leasing ban quarter after quarter, despite being required by the Mineral Leasing Act to conduct quarterly lease sales. At this point in the Obama administration, they had held 35 onshore lease sales, 35 under Barack Obama. And that's not all. The Biden administration is actively working to starve the fossil fuel industry of financial capital in order to push them out of existence. That's right. They keep talking about the supply and the demand, and yet they crush the supply by starving of the capital that it needs. This is capital-intensive stuff, Madam President. In March, the Securities and Exchange Commission released a proposed rule on climate disclosure. Climate disclosure. This authority forcing publicly traded companies to develop and disclose their risks from climate change is not in the purview of the SEC. They don't have the authority to do that. Congress has never passed a law granting them new authority in this space. It only serves to further discourage investment in domestic energy development and prevent American energy independence, a critical tool for peace and the reduction of global emissions. Now, isn't that ironic? The Biden administration is succeeding in its mission to destroy any chance to once again be energy independent. Their radical nominees, actions in the courtroom, regulatory schemes, budget proposals, foot-dragging, exude hostility toward fossil fuels, inflicting a distinct chilling effect on the oil and gas industry. Madam President, I've talked to a number of producers in North Dakota, and they're capital-starved. If the right messages were being sent to the markets, we could pick up another 200,000 to 400,000 barrels of oil per day. In January of 2022, this year, North Dakota produced 1.1 million barrels per day. To put this in context, Europe imports 2.3 million barrels per day from Russia. At North Dakota's peak, we produce 1.5 million barrels per day. North Dakota alone, Madam President, North Dakota alone could provide 2/3 of the product Europe imports from Russia. It would be cleaner than Russian oil and would lessen Putin's malign leverage over Europe and really the rest of the world. Investors in domestic oil and gas have to receive the right market signals in order to invest their capital. The administration seems to believe energy production is simply a switch you turn on or a valve that you turn, and then when you need it. And then if you don't need it, you just turn it off. No harm, no foul. It's not. It's very capital intensive, as I said, and reliant on regulatory certainty. And I'm not talking about 6 days of certainty or 6 months of certainty, but more like 6 years of certainty. No sane energy CEO would invest millions or billions of dollars in a project with the backdrop of an administration seeking to, quote, transition them out of existence within months. Let's take a walk down memory lane on some of the signals this administration has sent to the industry. First, the president himself said during a campaign stop in 2019, quote, I guarantee you, we are going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate with them. Well, congratulations, Mr. President. You kept the promise. Secretary Granholm appeared in a video calling for leaving fossil fuels, quote, in the ground, she said. She then spoke to reporters at the Energy and Environmental Research Center in Grand Forks, North Dakota, an exceptional organization at the forefront of promoting carbon capture and other innovative solutions to reduce CO2 emissions. During her comments, she proclaimed the United States doesn't, quote, get this now, the Secretary of Energy proclaimed, quote, we don't have much moral authority to criticize China over its emissions. We, the United States of America, doesn't have moral authority over China? Really, Madam Secretary? That's what you believe about the country you serve? How about climate czar John Kerry? He flies around the world making outlandish comments like the United States won't have coal in 2030 and discourages the world from buying our products, U.S. energy, while fanning the flames of radicalism, proclaiming Ukrainian war refugees are nothing compared to climate refugees. It's like he's the bishop of the Church of Climatology or something. He's even expressed concern that this pesky war crimes going on over there of Vladimir Putin are taking focus away from the real tragedy, climate change. Then he gets in his jet and flies home. Meanwhile, recent reports indicate the administration has turned to despots like Iran and Venezuela instead of to producers right here in America to help bring the Biden inflation under control by producing more of their dirty oil instead of our cleaner production. It makes no sense, and it's offensive to every American worker, Madam President. We have a geopolitical opportunity right now to cut Putin's malign influence, and we should be taking full advantage of it. What we ought to be doing is encouraging production not just with our rhetoric, but with our actions. Producing more U.S. oil and gas will, believe it or not, proclaim it or deny it, it's the truth, it will reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if you don't want to take my word for it or trust the extensive studies, the science, and the documentation of this fact, Biden EPA Administrator Michael Regan, just last week in a call with the Financial Times, in a Financial Times recent, calls for increased oil output are compatible. Get this now. This is the Biden EPA administration, the Administrator Regan. Calls for increased oil output are compatible with goals to cut CO2 emissions. In fact, he said specifically, quote, these are not mutually exclusive goals. And Administrator Regan is exactly right. Producing more U.S. oil and gas will reduce the West's reliance on dirtier fuels from our adversaries, and doing so also avoids unilaterally disarming our economy and losing ourselves to a 2050 fantasy that has come straight up to a 2022 reality. Some in the Biden administration may finally be starting to understand energy security is national security and economic security. And so, Mr. President, I say let's make the world safer, let's make the world cleaner, and let's unleash American energy production. With that, I yield the floor.